The rain hasn't stopped in 4 years. Not once. Not for a single sunrise or sunset, not that we see those anymore. The sky is a lid of gray and iron, a ceiling of permanent storm. It moans and shifts like a restless animal, never letting us forget that the world we once knew has drowned beneath its own breath. The oceans have come inland. The rivers have grown teeth. The land itself has forgotten how to be dry. I'm speaking from what used to be downtown Seattle, or so I think. The coastline is gone. The towers that survived the first waves now rise from the flood like jagged, rotting teeth. Half of them lean at impossible angles, foundations gnawed away by water that smells of metal and oil. The streets are canals now, dark and bottomless. Sometimes you can still see the faint outline of a traffic light under the water, swaying with the current like some ghost of civilization trying to signal a world that no longer cares. We used to call it the relentless rain. Now it's just life. The sky weeps everything it has left. The old governments tried to fight it. They built sea walls, shelters, relocation zones, all of them failed. Some were swallowed by rising tides, others by panic. The last transmissions from the Continental Council came 3 years ago, before the networks went quiet. The rain fried most of the satellites. What few signals still crawl across the static now are rogue frequencies, survivors like me, broadcasting from whatever scraps of tech they can keep dry long enough to matter. The air smells like rust and salt. Every breath feels borrowed. When the first floods hit, people tried to adapt floating colonies, boat towns, hydrohabitats. But the constant downpour never gave them a chance to stabilize. Water ruined everything: crops, engines, batteries, and bones. Diseases spread faster than rumors. Fungi thrived where we couldn't. The mold crept into everything: the walls, the lungs, the food. Some say it's alive now, conscious even, watching us drown with quiet patience. You can still find the ruins of the old world if you wade deep enough. The upper floors of apartment buildings, rusting billboards, hollowed churches that have become sanctuaries for birds and rainwater. I passed through one yesterday. The stained glass was still intact, showing saints looking down through streaks of water like they were crying with the sky. Beneath their gaze, someone had painted a new prayer across the altar. When the world flooded, we learned to float. Not everyone learned fast enough. There are survivors, scattered and soaked, floating clans, scavengers, traders on makeshift rafts. Some still believe in rebuilding, others just drift between ruins, salvaging batteries, canned food, and memories. Trust is rarer than sunlight. The factions that remain don't call themselves nations or armies. They're weather cults, storm worshippers, flood scavengers, or those who think the rain is cleansing the planet of us. There's the deluge order up north. They pray to the flood like it's a living god. I met one of them once. His eyes were clouded, voice cracked from chanting in the storm. He told me the rain was Earth's way of remembering how to breathe again. Maybe he was right. I remember what the city used to sound like: traffic, laughter, the low hum of living things moving towards something. Now it's all just static and water. The only rhythm left is the drumming of rain on metal rooftops and the soft buzz of my transmitter. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine the sound of footsteps outside, real footsteps, but it's always just the rain. There are nights when I look out across the flooded streets and see faint lights moving in the distance. Boats, maybe, or the reflection of lightning on the water. It's hard to tell anymore. The horizon no longer exists. Everything blurs into gray. But even in this gray, life hangs on. Moss and algae grow thick across the skeletons of skyscrapers. Fish swim where offices once stood. The world, in its cruel way, is still alive, just not for us. Nature has taken the city back, one drop at a time. Every transmission I send feels like a message in a bottle. I don't know if anyone's listening. Maybe the world has already forgotten how to respond. But I keep broadcasting anyway. Maybe it's hope. Maybe it's habit. Maybe it's madness. This is Station 9.7, your last voice in the storm. If you're out there, if your radio still works, if your world is still holding together, keep it that way. Find high ground. Stay warm. Don't let the rain take you. The signal fades for a moment, swallowed by thunder. Then quieter, almost like a confession. Sometimes I think I hear other voices in the static. Maybe other survivors. Maybe echoes. The rain carries sound in strange ways now. The world has ended softly. Not with fire, not with war, but with the sound of endless rain, washing everything away until even memory begins to dissolve. Still, the transmitter hums. The rain falls. The voice speaks. And somewhere in the static, someone might still be listening. This is Miles Harrington. If you tune past the static and the interference, you'll find my voice on 9.7. I used to dread hearing my own name. Now I say it like an anchor, steady, small, stubborn. Names are important when the rest of the world dissolves. They tie you to something that used to be true. I was a broadcast engineer before the rain learned to keep time. I knew coax and cathodes, how to slope an antenna against wind, and how to coax a dead transmitter back to life with duct tape and prayer. That trade saved me. Not because I'm a genius, I'm not, but because a dead city is still a city if someone remembers how to make it speak. When the towers went quiet and people scattered into the water, I walked down into the basement of the old station and refused to leave. I cleaned the valves, threaded spare wire through rusted conduit, and taught myself to make batteries last longer by listening for the hum they hated to give up. Survival here is work of the smallest tolerances. I keep a pedal generator in a corner where the air is least damp. A heavy thing rusted with seaside salt, its chain replaced twice with braided fishing line. When fuel runs low, which is most of the time, I power the transmitter with a hand-cranked alternator and a bank of salvaged cells. I know which stores downstairs still have dry sugar, which vending machines are hollowed out, and where the municipal water plant's intake used to sit. I have a system for keeping the station dry. Plastic sheeting lashed over doors, desiccant jars the size of sandbags, a tarpaulin roof patch that I restitch whenever I can find decent thread. It is tedious. It is repetitive. It keeps me breathing. People ask me on the air how I get clean water when it's raining forever. I tell them the truth in measured parts. Rain is abundant but not safe. The storms carry grit, and the runoff collects metal and oil from the carcasses of our cities. I collect what I can from the highest gutters, filter it with cloth and charcoal, and then heat it until I am sure the steam doesn't smell like iron. It is never glamorous. I keep a tin kettle and a thermometer that no longer reads degrees properly. I watch the steam and judge. Hope is often a temperature you learn by habit. Food is barter. Food is memory. I trade batteries for canned beans, a spool of wire for dried fish. Once a month, if I'm fortunate, I make a run with a small skiff tethered to a raft and head for the higher neighborhoods. In the upper apartments, people left behind jars with lids that still seal, peaches with the rows of syrup still clinging to the glass. Those jars are religious to me now. I hoard one for winter, whatever that means under a sky that never thaws or brightens. There is a ledger, of course, a notebook with dog-eared pages and a coffee stain that I accidentally spilled after reading a transmission from a voice I thought might be my sister. I write the date at the top of every page, even though dates have blurred together. Rituals anchor me, the sound of pen on paper, the click of a dial, the way I knock 3 times on the transmitter's case before I start a broadcast. I know these sound like superstitions, and maybe they are. But when everything else has been stripped away, small certainties become talismans. I have lost more than I can count. Once there was a house with a porch and a sister who loved orchids, and a child who learned to whistle the theme song from an old cartoon. I still have the whistle tucked into a waterproof pouch under the radio bench. I thought I could protect them. I thought the city would hold. Then the water rose while we slept. I remember holding my son under my jacket, the smell of wet wool, the way he laughed once when a gull landed on our roof, and then the roof collapsed into a current that smelled like gasoline. My sister's voice on the emergency band was the last thing I heard before the signal cut, telling me to go, telling me to survive. I didn't get there in time. I wasn't with them when the river took the neighborhood. I keep the whistle not to call them back. I don't believe in that, but to remember the exact pitch of their small rebellions against fear. Guilt is a heavy currency. It sits in my chest like water in an old boot. It makes my hands tremble when I open a crate of canned peaches and imagine their faces around a table that no longer exists. It makes me say things into the mic that I don't entirely mean, because sometimes I need the lie to get me through. We're okay, I'll say when we aren't. Then I'll pause and correct myself intimately off the air. Not yet, I whisper to the room and the rain and whatever hears. People survive by clinging to purposes. Mine is the broadcast. I keep the signal alive because it stitches a geography of presence where there is only absence. Every evening, before I check the batteries, before I sip the lukewarm coffee, I sit under the dim glow of the lamp, and I read the log of voices that once poured through this room. A fisherwoman who still sings lullabies to her children from a boat. A mechanic who claims a compressed air engine might still work if someone can find a piston. An old man who says he remembers the smell of spring and keeps repeating the same 3-line poem until I almost believe him. I have never met most of them. I may never meet any. But when they come in on the band, I am less of a single person and more of a place. Connection is survival for the soul. That is the truest thing I can say. You can ration your food and mend a fraying life jacket until it holds air like a prayer. But without another human voice returning your name when you call, without someone to respond to the radio's thin hymn, the world grows unreal. I learned this in the months after the floods when my days were only maintenance and my nights were emptier. The first time Lena answered my call, a voice like gravel and coffee, I almost collapsed in gratitude. She was 2 towers over, living in a gutted library that still smelled of paper and possibility. For 3 nights, we exchanged coordinates and stories. She told me how she kept stacks of books between her walls to insulate against the damp. I told her where to find a sealed can of milk. We never met. The rain made excuses for us, but her voice was proof that someone else had survived by the same stubbornness of small inventions and daily rituals. Trust is a currency I spend carefully. There are raiders, the kind who trade in panic and stolen fuel, who circle the buoyant settlements like wolves. There are zealots who preach that the rain is a cleansing, and that anyone on the shoreline belongs to the deluge now. I have learned to read their frequencies and to cut my broadcast short when I hear a certain rasp, the sound of a group boasting about a planned takeover. I learned to avoid the barter docks at night and to keep my raft light and my hands clean. Violence is a constant calculation, a danger that teaches you to sleep with one eye open and your hand on a rope. And then there is the slow violence, mold in the bread, algae blooming in fish tanks, the subtle decay of joints and small bones under a life of cold and damp. I take care of myself in the ways I can. I patch a blister. I stretch the tendons that worry when I climb to fix an antenna. I sleep when the generator hum lulls me. I also try to remember the softer muscles, humor, the ability to read someone's voice for a laugh, because these things dull if you don't use them. What keeps me going? Duty, yes, but also stubbornness. There is a private joy in keeping something working that should be dead. I like the way the transmitter buzzes, a small human sound layered over the rain. I keep broadcasting because if you are listening, the world has not quite finished its erasure. Every reply, every crackling affirmation is proof that something human persists. Maybe that is naive. Maybe it is delusional. But what else is there to be if not the small, irrational hope that your message will catch on another ear and form the basis of a new story? I have plans, small, brittle plans. I keep notes, ways to coax fuel from sludge, maps of rooftops that still hold solar cells, lists of names I trust. They're not heroic. They are practical. How many tins of peaches left where the next battery might be scrounged, the schedule for the generator's oiling. I tell myself that if the radio ever goes completely dark, someone else will find the ledger and that they will know where to look for a working tube, for the spare parts in the crawl space. Someone will find the whistle and know that a man used to hold his child and try to save him. Tonight, as I tune the dial and the rain bangs its old rhythm on the metal roof, I reach for that whistle and press it to my lips. It sounds thin under the storm. It sounds like a memory. I announce my name like a benediction. This is Miles, I say. If you can hear me say so, tell me your name. Tell me what you do to stay alive. There is a pause. The rain takes a breath. Then another voice folds into the static, softer than I expected, careful. It says a name back. And whatever else the world has taken, the reply is enough. This isn't just more rain. Not anymore. At first, the downpour felt like punishment, an unending test for patience and waterproofing. Now it's a different beast, a storm system that learned to sit and never leave. We used to mark time by seasons. Now time is measured in storms. A storm is a week, then a month, then a year, and it changes the rules as it sits. It battered the land to pulp, then it sat and chewed at the bones. I can hear it right now, through the thin walls of the station. Rain like wire being drawn taut, lightning that doesn't so much flash as settle into the air and stay. The big change is persistence. The atmosphere developed a slow, sticky circulation. The jet streams stalled, they used to hurry weather along, but now they curl and park, holding swamps of cloud over whole regions. Warm oceans feed that cloud like a feeding ground. More evaporation means more moisture in the air, more latent energy to release as rain. The math of it, what the old textbooks called positive feedback, is ugly. Warmer seas, right arrow, more evaporation, right arrow heavier. Storms, right arrow, more freshwater, dumped on places that can't handle it. Collapsed systems. The scientists who broadcast warnings before everything went quiet used words like amplification and blocking patterns. I write them down in the ledger like apothecary recipes, not because I can fix them, but because language is one of the few things the storm can't drown. The rains brought new hazards. The water carries dissolved metal, fuel, and chemicals from toppled factories and buried infrastructure. Streets have become slow-moving sewers. The stuff that used to be contained now floats free and mixes with every little river that forms inside the city. The result is an invisible soup bacteria that learned to thrive in brackish, polluted water, algae blooms turning fish sick, and a new breed of mold that eats through insulation and lungs alike. We wear respirators when we can. I patch mine with rubber from an old tire when the supply runs low. Why is survival getting harder each week? Because everything that used to be simple, clean water, predictable weather, food distribution, is now a scavenger hunt against time and rot. Water, there's water everywhere, but not a drop that's reliably safe. Rain is heavy with particulates. Street runoff is a cocktail of oils and fertilizers. Wells are saltier every month as the ocean edges in. My routine is relentless. I collect from the highest gutters and cisterns I can reach, run it through cloth to strip the worst grit, pass it through charcoal and sand I pack into a tin filter, then boil it until I trust it. Solar pasteurizers work when the sun decides to show up, but the sun rarely shows up long enough. Boiling uses precious fuel. Fuel maps the economy now. I trade food for kerosene when I must. I keep iodine tablets only for emergencies, a single pill when I'm too tired to boil. If you're listening and you've got a different method that's safer, tell me. Share it over the band. We've lost too many to trying to drink what's easy. Food. The supply chain collapsed fast. Refrigeration gave out. Fungus and rot moved in. I learned to salt and smoke fish in a contraption fashioned out of a tar barrel and a grate pulled from a subway tunnel. Canning is a precious skill. Sealed glass jars become treasures of shelf life. We ration calories strictly. Canning jars I found in the upper floors of a grocery store are like small altars. There are gardens, rooftop patches where people grow algae and salt-tolerant plants, but soil is a rare commodity. Seeds from old community centers are precious. I barter carefully, 1 jar of peaches for a packet of heirloom lettuce seeds. People hoard seeds like they hoarded coins before the collapse. Fuel and power. The grid died and never came back. Solar panels exist where people had the foresight to secure them. For the rest, generators are our lungs. I keep a pedal generator and a hand crank alternator for moments when batteries must be conserved. Every transmission from me is a decision, a human connection versus a battery cell. I learned to broadcast in bursts, 5 minutes on, 20 minutes off, and to schedule in a way that a neighbor could anticipate me without me losing everything. If you are depending on radio, conserve. Don't expect me on the dial every hour. If a friendly voice says they'll be online at midnight, show up then. Routine is as important as fuel. Medicine, the clinics fell. Antibiotics are rarer than faith. A cut that would have been a pinprick 2 decades ago can turn into something worse quickly. I keep a small field kit, sutures from a vet supply, a small vial of morphine someone traded me, pain relievers that I dole out like sermons. We learn to improvise. Honey on a wound, non-sterile but better than nothing. Clean dressings from boiled cloth. There is no triage center, no public health office dispatching resources. When an infection happens, we hold council and decide who gets the last pill. Those are impossible conversations. Society, the institutions that once said this is how we repair our shades. The municipal pumps that fed the city are clogged with silt and dead things. The water treatment plant's intake valve is irreversible. Someone looted the controls and moved on. The satellites that once told us whether patterns and coordinated rescue are mostly dead. The storm fries the links and the hardware corrodes in salty air. In their absence, local groups have formed scavenger rafts, barter covens, whether cults that interpret the storm as holy judgment. The deluge order, who I encountered once, believes the water is a purifier. They sabotage salvage operations that they can't justify spiritually, which makes trade dangerous. Raiders operate like a tide. They pick a place, strip it, and move on. They take food, batteries, and sometimes people. They're not always brutal in the cinematic sense. Often they're efficient and cruel, which is worse. Encounters. Human encounters now swing between the banal and the lethal. There was the time a small convoy came up the channel, 3 craft lashed together, a makeshift flotilla with children and a couple of musicians. They hailed me with tin whistles and a song. We traded a can of peaches for a guitar string and 2 jars of pickled vegetables. Then there are the nights I wake to the thump of oars and realize it's not a trade party but a looking party. Raiders are clever. They listen to the band and triangulate signals. Once, after a long broadcast where I had aired coordinates for a supply drop in a neighboring tower, I found scorch marks where someone had tried to force entry. I learned to mask coordinates, to send code that only those who trust me can parse. Trust is everything. Science in a sentence. The atmosphere got hotter, the ocean got warmer, the loops that used to move whether along got lazy. The result, rain that stalls. The result of stalled rain is constant hydraulic pressure on everything human-made. Concrete blooms and flakes, metal rusts from within, and electronics decay in humid nights. I learned to coat critical boards in wax and oil, to pack valves in silica where possible. Old physics hasn't been repealed, it's just meaner now. There are other mechanisms at work too. The permafrost thawed in places the maps used to show as forever frozen, and released pockets of methane that fed regional heating. Coastal currents shifted and brought warm water to places that never saw it before, upsetting fisheries and breeding algal clouds that poison fish. The chemical runoff creates dead zones where fish die by the thousands and float like pale moons on black water. When a fish die-off happens, it brings predators, rats, gulls, and a new hunger in people who haven't eaten meat in months. Limits press on us like wet clothes. My stock of batteries can stretch me a fortnight if I go dark otherwise. The spare parts I keep for the transmitter are valuable because such things take months to scrounge and weeks to fit. I cannot rebuild a pump by myself. My hands are calloused from climbing antenna masts and from stitching tarps, not from construction. Actionable tactics I use and broadcast because if one person survives, it's worth sharing, are practical and small. Collect rain from heights. It's still contaminated, but less so than street runoff. Use tarps angled into containers and float a layer of oil to trap some particulates before filtration. Oil floats on water. You can skim it off. Basic filtration. Cloth to remove grit right arrow sand layer. Coarse charcoal, not garden charcoal. Char from burned hardwood works better right arrow fine cloth. Then boil for at least a long minute. Solar pasteurization works if you can build a clear box and leave water in shallow black tubs for a sunny day. Boiling is the surest thing we have. Food preservation. Salt, smoke, can. If you find preserves in sealed jars, keep them. Learn how to reseal. Screw lids can be heated and retorqued. Dried algae and pressed protein cakes are staples where regular agriculture fails. Power thrift. Broadcast in scheduled bursts. Dim lights. Run the pedal generator instead of a fuel hummer when possible. Reclaim batteries from abandoned UPS units and server racks. They last longer in series when balanced. Balance equals rotate cells. Shelter. Patch leaks with layered plastic sheeting. Use books or foam for insulation between wall cavities, and keep vents filtered for mold spores. Use desiccant jars, salt, and charcoal in small spaces like transmitter cabinets to keep electronics from fogging. Watch for psychological erosion. Keep rituals, a call and response, a song, a ledger. Keep names. They steady the mind. None of this is heroic. It's maintenance. Maintenance is what keeps a future possible. The new crisis that sits on the horizon is different. The last 3 months, the storm on the northern edge of the city, a vast swell of cloud we called the Black Shelf for its low, oil-dark underside, has been bulking up. Lightning that used to be a flash now arcs and snakes in networks, striking in patterns that feel like teeth. The rain has taken on a smell, a copper tang that makes my tongue numb if I breathe it too long through a cloth. Fish are washing up with lesions. The algae that used to be green now slews off a dark, oily slime under the light. Farmers upriver in patch transmissions reported that their freshwater beds turned brackish overnight, and the bed's pumps failed. Motors fused with a saltiness that seemed to come from nowhere. I broadcast warnings where I can, but a warning is only useful if someone hears it and can act. Acting means fuel, means manpower, means a plan someone values enough to risk. Most nights I stay awake and make those plans alone on graph paper by lamplight. Routes that avoid a stretch of canal choked with chemical film. A timetable for rotating the antenna watch so we don't lose the net when an operator tires. A contingency for moving the transmitter if the station floods past the first floor. I can smell the ocean in the rain now. The tide line creeps inward with each storm. If the next swell finds its way into the basements where we keep our batteries, we're done. Still, there are possibilities. A rumor loops through the frequencies like a pulse. A group upriver claims they found a holding pond, a basin where rain sat long enough to settle out particulates and biological bloom. They called it a still water cache. It could be a lie, it could be bait, it could be salvation. People will go for it. That is how the next chapter begins, whether it brings rescue or ruin. For now, I keep broadcasting. I keep handing out instructions between the more private things I say into the microphone. Confessions, memories, jokes that have long since lost their audience. You learn to tuck directives between stories. People are more likely to remember how to scavenge a solar cell if you tell them about your sister's laugh first. The crisis is here. It is physical and chemical and social. It corrodes our tools and frays our networks of trust. It brings new predators and new politics to the surface of a drowned world. It shortens nights and lengthens fear. And as the Black Shelf bulks into something the men on the neighboring rafts whisper about in clipped tones, I tighten what I can tighten. Tense straps, battery leads my jaw. I send out the call in a measured voice, because measured voices make people listen rather than panic. This is miles on 9.7, I say. There's a shelf forming to the north. If you live anywhere up current of the old industrial zone, move your stores high. If you need to transfer between rafts, wait until sundown when the winds ease. If you've got extra charcoal or seed packets, send a packet and a frequency. We're going to need them. Thunder answers like a drum roll, and the storm keeps learning how to stay. I used to think there were two kinds of weather, the weather that passed and the weather that stayed. Now there's a third kind, the weather that learns you by name. The black shelf hasn't moved, only grown. Lightning knits itself across the sky in slow stitches, and the rain keeps listening for a weakness. Every day the city gives up something more. Yesterday it was a box of batteries I'd been saving. Today it was the methylated spirits I used to jumpstart the old hand crank when the pedal generator was tired. The little economies we built on habit. Swap a spool of wire for a jar of olives. Trade one boat oar for 2 weeks of canned beans. Those economies are fraying at the edges like rope left in salt. We are running out of practical things. Water is a daily calculus of risk versus need. Food is a ledger where every entry cuts into a life I refuse to mourn yet. Fuel is the most brutal accounting. You spend now and you hope you find more later. The more I broadcast, the more batteries I use. The more others hear me, the more likely someone will come searching for what I guard. Sometimes I think the radio is both a lifeline and a bell that rings when you're about to be taken. It was at the barter docks that I felt the thread of things break. We used to meet on that stretch of canal where the old coffeehouse sign still hung like a ragged tooth, where a sunken delivery truck made a small island that people lashed rafts to. Tonight it was a market of lanterns and voices. I'd pushed my raft up, tied the mooring line around a rusted post, and climbed up to trade for canned fish and a spool of insulated wire. Lena was there, shorter now, voice sandpapered by smoke and singing in odd pauses. She handed me a jar of pickled beans like an offering. We hadn't been there 10 minutes before a shape moved in the water, a long black raft with a strip of burnt orange as a flag. Raiders are less a uniform than a pattern of behavior. They move as a single calculation of want. They come in small, tightly organized bands now, with plans for siphoning fuel and people. This one had a grapple and a man who knew how to yell like a judge. Hands up, bags out, quiet and quick. People obeyed because to not obey invites a kind of argument you can't afford in the wet. A boy dropped his pocket radio in the water. It bobbed for a second like a stunned fish and sank. A woman tried to hide a tin under her coat, and the man, the judge, snapped his torch and found it. They were efficient and quick. The skill was a kind of education. The rest of us hadn't agreed to learn. I could have stayed quiet. I could have let them take what they wanted and go on with more careful plotting. Instead, something with less sense and more stubbornness pushed me. I stood up on the roof of my raft and blew the whistle. It sounded like a small, ridiculous alarm under the thunder, but it was enough to make someone look up. There are different rules for noise now. Noise can rally help, or it can map you as a target. The judge's eye found me like a compass. He pointed his torch and barked, "That one, up top." I had a choice. Stay invisible and hope to keep the small horde I'd come for, or call attention and risk losing everything. I called attention. Maybe it was bravery. Maybe it was stupidity. Maybe I thought the whistle might call Lena's name back in a way that would not leave me with only my ledger and the taste of tin in my mouth. Whatever it was, it made me move. The judge's men climbed like crows. They were quicker than I expected. One of them cracked my raft's mooring with a crowbar and shoved the bow. My raft slid and the canned goods tipped into black water. I reached out for a jar and missed. A hand closed on my wrist instead, not a raider's hand, but Tomas, a skindiver and scrounger who trades in knowledge and limbs. He grabbed my sleeve and pulled me down, dragging me under a tarp as a flare spat orange in the rain. We got away with less than we should have. The judge took a crate of batteries and the last of the spirits. He took 2 pairs of boots and a pocket knife someone had traded their wedding band for. He looked at me before he left and spat, Broadcast too much, announcer. Makes you a lighthouse. Then he grinned like it was wisdom. I was left with a ruined mooring, a raft smelling of salt and loss, and an ache in my chest that had nothing to do with cold. That night my broadcast was short. I spoke into the mic as if rehearsing a confession. I told people to avoid the docks for 3 days, to only come at dawn, to watch for a man with a judge's light, and to run if they heard the crowbar. I did not mention that I'd chosen visibility because I wanted to be seen. I did not tell them Tomas pulled me under the tarp and held my hand until the thunder stopped. The raids are one thing. Trust is another, slower thing that corrodes without drama. Rumors work the city like mold. I hear them on the band, a whisper here, a claim there. Sometimes rumors keep people alive. Sometimes they send them to a trap. The one that began to curl through the frequencies like smoke, the thing that kept me awake a week and a half, was about water that was not the sort that tasted of iron and old oil. Still water cash, someone said. The phrase slid into one of the nets, and a dozen people answered like hungry mouths. The rumor was that upriver, beyond the old industrial channel, a basin sat that had been built into an old reservoir. It was deep and sheltered, and the scum that the floods pushed around had settled there. Sedimentation, they claimed, had done for them what pumps and filters once did for us. It let water sit and clear. Some said the basin was fenced and managed by a group calling themselves the Keepers. Others said it was guarded by men with long guns. A few voices, the ones you try to hear and not hear at once, said it was a lie, a bait to send raiders and well-meaning scavengers to their deaths. Listening to the band is a profession now. You learn the voice prints of liars and saints. You learn to read the gaps and the silence. I mapped the rumor like a cartographer of possibility. Lena said we should go. Tomas said we were idiots if we left the station. People on the net split into camps. Those who believed the cash must exist because they needed it to, and those who said belief was a form of hunger and that the hungry must be cautious. I could have stayed and kept the net alive. The station is a node. Lose it and the ripples stop. But there's a different calculus that lives in the marrow. If the rumor was true, we could stitch together a ring of sites, reduce our risk, and give people a real chance. If it was false, the expedition would cost what we could not afford. I argued with myself in the ledger and out loud. I made a list of what we would need. 2 rafts, a sealed cooler for spare jars, a spool of insulated wire to repair the transmitter on the fly, a hand pump, iodine tablets, a small desiccant pack, and for God's sake, someone who knew first aid. The list looked too large for the 2 soaked people we could spare. There is a particular kind of fear that is colder than lightning, the fear that you will be the reason someone else dies. That night I sat under the lamp and turned the whistle in my hands until the metal felt like a memory. In the end, we made a decision born of too small courage. Lena agreed to come. Tomas agreed with a face like stone. I taught them the code phrases, the ones that only trusted people used to verify identity. The second verse of a song, the time swap, the way a name is pronounced. We would leave at dawn when the rain eases and the water becomes a little less cruel. I would leave the transmitter on a timed loop. 5 minutes of signal, 30 minutes dead. I would leave the ledger and the spare parts in a waterproof canister and lash it to the inside of the transmitter cabinet, with instructions on how to broadcast if something happened to me. Packing was its own ritual. We took only what fit in 2 crates, lashed with rope and patched with plastic. I took the whistle. I considered taking the whistle as an offering, a call to the past, and left it where it was. I packed instead a jar of peaches I didn't want to touch. I packed the last of my spirits and wrapped the hand crank alternator in a grease-stiff cloth. Tomas took the crowbar he used to pry open service panels. Lena took a thin book of poetry. She said it made her remember human cadence. When we pushed off, the city seemed to watch with 100 hollow windows. The old coffeehouse sign swung like a metronome. Somewhere a radio came to life and a voice said, "If you can hear me, be careful. There's a swell north of the old paper mill." It was the kind of small, human instruction that means more than flood warnings. We moved cautiously, scanning the waterline and watching the sky. The black shelf kept its dark bulk to the north like a promise. The further we went, the more the rumor grew teeth. We passed a grounded barge with symbols painted in hurried graffiti, a ring of 3 dots that some rafts used to mark safe haunts. We found the shoreline littered with evidence of other eyes. Cooking depressions, tin cans chewed, rope marks where rafts had tied and then untied in a hurry. The tension didn't ease. It sharpened. Every dark hull in the distance was a question, every floating bottle a story. We listened, we whispered a code, and we moved like a single thought. There are no guarantees in a city that is learning to be an ocean. There is only momentum, and the hope that momentum finds you directionally lucky. My heart buzzed where the battery used to be, and every time my radio picked up a faint voice, a neighbor giving coordinates, a child laughing at something that sounded like a joke, I felt both the tug of duty and the pull of something else. The possibility that the rumor might be true, that the keepers might have done what we could not, and that we might not have to be the last generation that knows the old songs. We pushed on, and the rain kept learning our names. We found the basin at dusk, which was a mercy and a lie. Dusk used to be a comfort, the clock of the day easing us toward rest. Now dusk is a detail. The storm makes its own light, and the horizon is a rumor. Still, when we rounded the bend and the water opened into a sheltered basin, my breath left me like a stolen thing. It looked nothing like the romantic things people put in their heads when they hear the words still water cache. It was a long, low pool tucked behind a collapsed paper mill embankment, its surface flat as a sheet of metal varnish. The water had a slow clarity you can see without touching sediment lay like a soft blanket on the bottom, and where the current eased, a thin green armature of algae carpeted the shoreline like moss on ancient stone. Near the far bank, bundles of reed and rope marked small platforms where people had tied rafts. A fence of scavenged metal and driftwood wrapped part of the shore like a barbarous hug. We drifted in on the quiet. Nobody met us at first. Then a woman in patched foul-weather gear stepped out from behind a pile of crates and watched us the way you watch a stranger at your door. She held a long pole with a flag stitched from ground sheet. The flag had a symbol, 3 concentric circles, the same mark we'd seen on the grounded barge earlier. A code, a sign that this place was not purely a rumor. "Keepers," she said without preamble. "You've come for water or trouble." Her voice had a hard edge to it. You could hear the calculus in each syllable. Lena answered first, with the phrase we'd used to verify each other. The second verse of a lullaby she'd hummed to herself when the waves took her roof. The woman's shoulders eased, and she nodded. We were led up past the reed platforms to a system of gutters someone had engineered out of copper pipes and old gutters. There were settling tanks, a series of 3 shallow pools, like a crude waterworks. The first pool caught the heaviest debris. The second was lined with packed sand and charcoal. The third was where the people filled their jars. A hand pump sat under a tarp, encased in a spiderweb of wire that looked like a miracle and a lie. They had built a slow-sonde filtration system, the most ancient, most patient technology there is. It works by letting water sit and pass slowly. Bacteria and particulates cling to the surface of the sand, forming a biological layer that actually cleanses the stream. It's slow, it's stupidly simple. It's exactly what a flooded, patient basin needs. I wanted to laugh with relief. I wanted to trade the conspiratorial ledger for jars and a promise. I wanted to call it into the band and send a party of rafts with nets and gratitude. But the sound of that want was a chime for danger. The keeper's leader, a man with one eye and a scar that made his smile lopsided, watched me and read me for what I was. A radiator of frequencies, a signal that could change the map of hunger. "We don't share with everyone," he said. "We keep what we can. We trade labor for water. You can work or you can leave." It was reasonable. It was bloodless. It would have broken me to bargain for water, but I would have. Lena Tomas and I set to tasks I had not expected to do. Hauling sand, fixing a leaky seal on the second tank, patching the hand pump with strips of rubber. It was the kind of work that returns you to your body and away from the ledger in your pocket. For one small, bright hour, there was the sound of real effort and the taste of a plan that might be long-lived. Then the sky changed. The black shelf isn't a wall. It's more like a thought that suddenly takes up the whole head. The light went wrong, the kind that comes before lightning and smells like iron. From the north, the shelf threw a curtain of rain that moved like a hand. It smeared the horizon into a wet bruise. We felt it first as a pressure change, like the air swallowing a lung. Then a drum, not rain hitting the water but rain hitting rain, a compound beat that made the skins of our drums tremble. At the same time, radios on the shore began to click with voices low, clipped, then frantic. A new pattern, rapid-fire calls from a calibrating band we'd heard used by the raiders. They were moving fast, too fast for scouts. The judge and his people had found a way to run long circuits, to link enough rafts into speed jets. When I heard the crunch of oars that matched the cadence of their calls, my stomach pitched. We had a split second, then a dozen decisions to make as if we could fold time like paper. The keepers argued for bartering with the raiders. Give them a small ration and they might leave. The keepers argued this with the flatness people use when they've rehearsed survival into policy. I argued with my own voice. Tell the network and call for reinforcements. But reinforcements are a myth we tell ourselves. They are other people with other problems. Their radios might be the raiders' dinner bell. Lena argued for silence. Empty boats are safer than visible assets. Tomas, who had spent his life finding routes through holes in pipe, said we had to move the jars and the pump into underground cisterns and sink the platforms. His hands were already calculating weight and leverage. I had two assets and one weakness. The assets, the whistle that makes people look and the transmitter that makes people come. The weakness, my compulsion to save more than my two hands could hold, to broadcast because a voice matters. If I broadcasted the location, we risked an immediate raid but also the possibility that other rafts, decent rafts, might come to defend or pick people up. If I didn't, the raiders might find us by sound or by luck and take everything anyway. Or worse, force the keepers to surrender the basin permanently. The judge's flotilla hit the far bank in a sound like a closing mouth. They moved with surgical efficiency. A ring of grapples, a short volley of iron, the same method we'd seen at the docks. This time their approach was ruthless with precision. They wanted the pump and the jars. They wanted to control the filtration. They were in a hurry. The storm would cover them. We had minutes. I turned to the transmitter. The idea was born of a dirty calculus. Use the radio like a lure. Draw the raiders away from the basin toward a noise that confuses them. Give the keepers time to sink jars and push rafts into hidden channels. The sound I could make would be crude. A loop of false coordinates. The voice of someone crying for help. A forged trail. It would be a lie, and lies have become our instruments of life. The other choice was simpler and lonelier. Keep silent, help defend the place physically, try to outfight organized thieves. My hands knew solder and cokes. My heart knew ledger and grief. I remembered the boy who'd lost his radio at the docks, the one whose laughter I'd heard briefly before the judge took his tin. I remembered the whistle and the guilt that lingers like mold when you choose visibility. I remembered my son's small hand under my coat and my sister's voice telling me to go. I realized with a clarity as brutal as lightning that the choice was not between signal and silence. It was between one life's insistence and many people's future. If I could make the raiders chase a ghost, maybe more jars would survive. Maybe the keepers would live. Maybe Lena and Tomas would live. I pulled the transmitter from its cradle and unscrewed the amp box with hands that trembled. Lena put her palm on my shoulder, and for a half second I felt a weight settle there that grounded me like an anchor. Tomas met my eyes and nodded, not in blind consent, but in the small solidarity of people who know a man's weakness and choose to help him be brave. I broadcast what I could fake. A staccato, panicked voice calling coordinates on the opposite bank, veiled with static, punctuated with a fake machine sound I'd recorded earlier to sound like a damaged engine. A lure that suggested an easier, richer target. I looped it through the band and then I cut and looped it again. The judge's men moved like moths to a candle. They had speed. They had greed. They had the taste of success. While they peeled off toward the fake signal, the keepers and our small crew sank jars, wrapped pumps in canvas and grease, and shoved rafts into covert channels I never would have guessed existed. Children, there were children, their cheeks bright with a kind of absurd happiness, were bundled and hidden under stacks of reed. The hand pump, the thing that made this place sacred, was jammed into a crate and lowered into a hollow below the bank. Lena capped the last jar with a practiced hand and pushed it into the belly of a raft. We were almost clear when a flare spat out of the raiders' center raft and a blast of shrapnel sang through the reeds. Tomas cried out and fell. He'd taken the worst of it, a piece of metal in his thigh and the sound of a bone under stress. Blood and rain made the scene theatrical and grotesque. The judge had realized something. He had the brain to split forces and the cruelty to test a man's limits. We could have run. We could have tried to push everything and everyone away down a hidden channel. But Tomas was still alive, gasping, and the raft with the last of our jars was in motion. Lena dug into the crate and strapped the pump to her back, and I saw her shoulders roll under the weight like a promise. She pushed the raft and a child clung to the reeds and laughed with a small, lunatic joy as if the sound could be a spell. Then the raiders came back. They'd worked our pattern. The fake distress call would be a breadcrumb if you knew how I thought. The judge returned with more of his men and a small engine that moaned like a wounded animal, cutting a path straight through the settlement. They were faster than I anticipated. They came with grapples and a plan to corral. I realized with a cold animal clarity that the last entity they would want to take was the transmitter. A working transmitter is a control point. Lose it, and the net of possible allies dwindles to gossip. Lose it, and other people will be alone again. I thought of the ledger in the transmitter cabinet with my notes and Tomas' jokes and Lena's lullaby lines. I thought of the whistle folded into a pocket of regret. The decision closed like a fist. I could keep broadcasting the fake signal and let men take the basin and watch the children sold along a chain of rafts. Or I could stay and drive the transmitter until my hands gave out, using the last of the battery to keep the channel open long enough for our people to get away, and for other, decent people to awake to the call and come, if any would, toward a distress that would be real. I chose the thing that felt like the only honest penance I had. I stayed. I told Lena to go. I told Tomas to go if he could, if not, to make sure he was as comfortable as a wet, bleeding man could be. They argued like people do in theater, quick, fierce, private bargaining. Lena kissed me on the cheek with rain on her lips and shoved a small pack into my hands, bandages, a jar of peaches, a strip of cloth she'd kept from an old dress. She pushed the raft until it slid free, and then she jumped in and was gone under a curtain of rain and, I hope, fate. I lit the transmitter and fed it the last cells with a kind of ritual. I spoke on the band, but this time my voice was not a lure. It was honest. I gave coordinates that I knew might not help everyone, but that would at least register in the memory of the network. I said names. Lena, Tomas, keepers. I said what the pump looked like and where the jars were hidden. I told people to avoid the east bank and to come quietly if they were decent. I kept the loop open until the battery thinned and the amp box burned. I watched the cathode glow like an eye that was dimming. Then the judge's men came to the station. I could hear their boots in the reeds. I could hear grapples and the metallic prayers of men who had learned to take. I kept talking until the last filament screamed and the world withdrew into a long, wet silence. When the transmitter died, the rain was louder. I expected pain. I expected the hand of a raider. What I got was the small, exquisite knowledge that I had done what I could. The ledger was safe in a canister I slipped into a cavity in the transmitter bench. The whistle was in my pocket still, because some things you can't leave behind. I don't know what happened to Lena and Tomas for certain. I think of them often. Lena's laugh like a thin rope, Tomas' hands full of patchwork solutions. The keepers got some of their jars away. Some were taken. People did what people always do in floods. They made bargains with danger and sometimes got lucky. That night after the station fell silent, the storm grew teeth. The black shelf made a sound like many drums. The judge took the station's parts. He was not interested in my ledger, only in salvage and speeds and the way a radio can be chopped into profit. But before he left, he paused and looked at the place where the transmitter had been, and I thought I saw something like a respect cross his face, ugly and brief. If I had a choice again, I don't know if I could make the same one. Perhaps I did it out of penance. Perhaps I did it out of a stubborn belief that a voice matters even if only to a single other ear. Perhaps it was the memory of a child's whistle in my hand, the one that would not stop calling for a laugh that would not come back. The rain kept learning our names. We taught it to some of them that night. It taught us others. I stayed behind because it felt like the only honest thing I had left to do. When the last filament in the transmitter died, it took with it a small piece of my faith. For a few breathless hours after the judge's men stripped the station, I thought the world had finally decided what it would be. Take everything or let some of us keep something. I sat on the floor of the gutted room, rain spitting through a hairline crack, and waited for the next instruction from fate. The next instruction didn't come in words. It came in movement. At dawn, if you can call the low light that dawn, I heard oars. 3 rafts, silent except for the whisper of rope against wood, slid into the basin's mouth. They moved like people who'd been listening for a long time. They were not raiders. They were not keepers. They were small, skeletal flotillas, patched and patient. People who had answers I did not expect. An old fisherman with a voice like an eroding cliff. A woman with a pack of seeds tied to her back. A man with a battered skin-diving mask who kept his hands in his pockets, as if afraid the world might mistake them for something else. They had come because of the call I made and because of other calls that had been sent on other nights. Not mine alone, but the net itself. My broadcast had been a thread. Others had tugged the web. Some listeners had decided that when one voice spoke of danger and named the keepers and the pump, it was reason enough to move, to risk. That knowledge did something like undo the guilt the judge had tried to root in me. Not entirely. Guilt doesn't wash out with gratitude, but it softened into a practical ache. The raiders took pieces of the settlement that night. They took the amp and the spare cells and the best of the metal. They left behind the things they could not quickly carry. Jars and hidden cisterns, the hand pump that had been jammed into a hollow, and a ledger in a tin that I'd shoved into the transmitter bench. Tomas, bless him, had made it to a shallow boat with a bandaged leg and a face full of vows to stitch himself together. Lena had not been with them when the raiders came back. She had pushed the last of the children down a secret channel and gone further inland. I do not know if she is alive. I am learning to live with that not knowing like an extra limb. The keepers scattered in a different way. They had decisions that were not mine, hold and fight or disperse and cede. Their leader, the one-eyed man with the scar, did not choose the hero's path. He chose prudence. He took a small contingent and led them upriver with a sack of jars and an irritable dignity. That choice angered some and saved others. Survival gives you these impossible bargains, the kind that make you ask whether you are a coward or merely realistic. In the days after, the basin became both a cemetery and a cache. People came with stories. A mother with a burned hand who could no longer lift a jar. A young man who'd left his boat and returned with a bag of battery cells. A child who sang in a high, sure voice and who knew the second verse of Lena's lullaby by heart. The jars that remained were parceled out carefully. I helped where my hands could help. I taught one woman how to patch a hand pump with melted plastic and thread. I showed a small cluster of boys how to balance a rowboat so it wouldn't take on water from a careless oar stroke. These tasks were small and mundane, and they mended the soul more than the wound. Physically, the world kept doing what the world does. It eroded and it grew at once. The black shelf receded like a tidal thought, only long enough to let us breathe and then return to press against the horizon. Algae carpets thickened in slow eddies, and a new kind of gull that I'd never seen before nested in the skeletons of old signs. The air tasted of metal some mornings, and of fresh moss on others. There were nights when the rain was a lullaby and nights when it sounded like fists on the roof. Nature was not healing in a neat, human sense. It was remaking itself, sometimes in ways that were hospitable to us, sometimes in ways that made our survival harder. A cluster of reed beds started to take hold on a sheltered bank, and with them came small fish that tasted of salt and something green. Birds nested in places they wouldn't have dared before. It is a cruel, indifferent kind of recovery. It offers things we need and takes the rest. I measured my own recovery in ritual. I still kept the ledger, now more precious than any battery. It sat in the tin can in the transmitter bench, safe in a way that made me proud and proud in a way that made me ashamed. I wrote in it every morning, not because anyone would read it, but because the act of writing felt like doing a maintenance check on my own heart. I wrote lists, names to watch for, tools that needed to be hardened against rain, a tally of jars. I wrote memories, my sister's laugh, the exact pitch of a child's whistle, the smell of tar in a summer that no longer exists. The ledger was both logbook and prayer. My hands healed better than my tally of wrong choices. The wound in Tomas's leg closed around its scar like a small, ugly promise. I learned to take stock of what I could carry. A handful of iodine, a strip of canvas, a spool of insulated wire. The rest I distributed or let go. The act of letting go taught me a great deal. In a dry city you can hoard. In a drowned one, hoarding is dangerous. It draws attention, rots in hidden corners, becomes weight your raft cannot bear. What changed inside me, though, is less tidy. The man who once thought of himself as a keeper of signals, a guardian of a tiny island of noise, became something less romantic and more durable. I learned that my value was not only in secrecy or in the ability to lure raiders away. It was in the way I translated what I knew into a thing someone else could use. I still miss the transmitter like a friend. I still speak aloud to the empty room sometimes, because silence presses like a hand on the throat. But the way I use my voice has shifted. I do not waste it on grand declarations. I trade it for hands and oars. I barter it for information and for a grip on someone's wrist when the raft tips. There is a strange grief that sits between survival and hope. Grief is not merely sorrow. It is a reorientation. It asks you to place your feet on the new shape of the world and take another step. Sometimes the grief is a physical thing, a wetness that collects in the eyes when you pass a ruined playground and remember how a child would have run there. Sometimes it is tactical, the knowledge that a choice you made saved some and exposed others. In the ledger I keep these as a taxonomy of error and of mercy. The taxonomy is an attempt to learn, be braver here, more cautious there. Hope arrived in small, odd parcels. A tin of peaches shared between 3 people. A boy who learned to play a tune on a rusted harmonica, and whose laugh sounded like a clean thing. The discovery of a patch of reed that could be woven into insulation. There was also hope in the unexpected solidarity of strangers. The way 3 rafts arrived at dawn, because some voice on the net had said Lena's lullaby, and someone had remembered and decided to come. Every small kindness felt like an argument against the lesson the water wanted to teach us, that humanity will dissolve if it must. Yet the future is not a tidy slope toward better. The region upriver reports other basins, some true and some traps. The black shelf continues to bulge. Scientists' old terminology, stalling, blocking patterns, feedback loops, echoed in the memory of what we used to call policy. There will be more raids and more bargains. There will be winters in which algae blooms suffocate the fish, and summers where the rain grows thin, and the water tastes of metal. The world is a sequence of conditions now, and we are learning to read them well enough to survive another day. As for me, I rebuilt a smaller, shabbier transmitter from parts salvaged from the raiders' discarded gear and the more generous hands of those 3 rafts. It does not reach far. It rasped once, like a throat cleared after a long cry, and a voice came back. It said a name I knew and then hung up. The sound was like a coin dropped into a well. I keep the radio close, not because I believe it will braid the whole world back together, but because it stitches me to a thread. Threads make nets. Nets make communities. Communities make possible the improbable. A seed saved, a child who learns how to tie a knot, a pump repaired. At night, when the rain is a thin thing and my lamp forgets its purpose, I pull the whistle from my pocket. Sometimes I blow on it softly. The sound makes the heart jump in its cage. It is, perhaps, a selfish thing, a call that may never be answered, but I have learned that selfishness can be a seed too. If you keep a small flame for the sake of habit, sometimes the flame becomes a fire that can be handed to another person. The ledger is still in the tin can, and the whistle is in my pocket, and the station is a ruin people tell good stories about. Lena's lullaby still loops in my head on the nights the rain is thin. Tomas writes to me sometimes, small footnotes scratched into the inside of a scavenged crate, and passed on by a friend of a friend who paddled by and said hello. He is alive. That news feels like a miracle, and miracles now are measured in things that used to be ordinary. I have learned to be patient with hope. It never arrives with trumpets. It is a damp hand that slides into yours and squeezes, and a voice across the water that says a name you know. It is the ledger, the whistle, the child's harmonica. It is the small raft that comes in the dawn. It is, sometimes, a life spared. The rain is still learning our names. We teach it new ones, sometimes by accident, sometimes by intention. I don't know where the world is going. I only know where I am. Here, keeping a small flame, counting jars, writing in a ledger, listening for the sound of oars and for voices that might mean company rather than threat. If you can hear me, if your radio hums with life, tell me a name. Tell me how you keep your water clean. Tell me what you eat when the jars run low. Share your map with me in a voice I can trust. We will share our mistakes too. We will pass on what works and what hurts. That is how we rebuild anything at all. Not with blueprints for cities, but with the slow, clumsy preservation of small rituals that mean we are still human. There is no neat ending. The black shelf will return, and we will meet it again. We will make new bargains. We will learn new ways to hold each other. And when the raiders come, as they will, I will do something stupid again because I cannot live with the thought of having done nothing. For now I write, I mend, I trade, and I listen. The ledger gets a new line today. Jars distributed, names recorded, seeds reserved. The rain taps the roof like a patient teacher. I close the book, tuck the whistle into my palm, and go out to check the pumps. Somewhere, a child laughs, and the sound carries past the water and over the reeds and into a sky that is still learning us. This is Miles on 9.7. If you've been listening through the static and the rain, you know by now what the world does best. It remakes itself without asking for our permission. It carves out new habits from old ruins and calls them survival. I have lived through enough wet winters to know the difference between a season and a sentence. The rain is not a sentence. It is a long, ongoing condition. We adapt or we don't. When I closed the ledger at night, I read the last line I wrote the way one reads a bookmark. Jars distributed, pump hidden, seeds reserved. Those are small, domestic things, not heroic. But if you stack enough of them, they become a structure. Habit builds habitats. The pump kept clean, the filter changed on schedule, the radio fed 5 minutes at a time so the batteries don't die. That is how we keep hope from evaporating. It isn't fireworks. It's a kettle boiling on a faithful stove. Have we found hope? Yes, the thin, fraying kind that counts. The basin survived the judge's men because people did what they could. They sank jars into cisterns. They taught a child to row. They gave a stranger a bandage. The keepers moved part of their cache upriver and seeded other basins. Tomas is alive and writes me footnotes passed along by other rafts. Lena's lullaby still rides on a frequency now and then. Someone hums it at night in a distant tower. The ledger exists. That matters. Little proofs pile up. Is the situation worse in some ways? Of course. The black shelf will return. Outbreaks will happen. Algae will bloom. Raiders will learn new tricks. The world has a new grammar and it does not take pity on nostalgia. The ocean edges closer in some places and withdraws in others. And the chemistry of everything shifts like a slow, quiet argument. There are mornings when the air tastes like metal and my hands ache with the memory of heavy work. Hope alone will not fix engines or cure infections. It must be married to work. So what do we do from here? I have stopped giving speeches and started giving lists. If you are listening and you have something you can do, try these small, practical things. They are not glamorous, but they keep people breathing. Collect water from the highest gutters and filter carefully. Cloth, sand, charcoal, then heat. Solar pasteurize when possible. Boil when you must. Share seeds and skills. If you can show someone how to reseal a jar or splice a wire, teach them. Skills travel farther than canned food. Keep a ledger. Names matter. Dates matter. If you write down who helped you and what worked, you create a map for the next person. Preserve radio discipline. Schedule transmissions, conserve batteries, use code phrases for identity. A net is only useful if it is alive and not burned down by greed. Protect children and the most vulnerable first. That simple ethics is how communities last. The truth I keep waking to is this. Survival is not a single heroic moment. It is 1,000 small mercies. It is the woman who traded a spool of insulated wire for a jar of peaches so her neighbor could heat water. It is the boy who learned to play a tune and made a stranger laugh in the dark. It is the man who chose to cut his losses and seed another basin instead of holding everything and losing more. Those are the acts that stitch a future out of ruins. I will not pretend I have all the answers. I still make mistakes. I still make decisions that later feel like counsel from someone I used to be and no longer trust. The radio can be a lure and a lifeline. I will keep choosing when to use it with a tremor of guilt and a steadiness of purpose. If you hear me on the band and my battery sounds thin, forgive me the brevity. I am rationing a voice that other people will need. What I ask simply, do not let the rain make you small. Keep the rituals of being human. Exchange names when you meet. Teach someone to patch a pump. Sing when you can. Make a ledger even if only to keep one other person from forgetting what you did. If you can spare a seed or a can or a battery, give it. If you cannot, pass on a technique. Do not fetishize heroism. Value maintenance. Maintenance is what makes possible the things that look like miracles. There will be days of despair. There will be nights when the wind looks like a fist and the horizon is nothing but a low bruise. On those nights I tell myself the following. A child learning to tie a knot is a threat to any empire of despair. A saved jar is airmail from the past to the next morning. A message in the radio, even if it reaches one other ear, is an argument against the silence the storm prefers. My final instruction, because I imagine this transmission will outlive my certainty, is blunt. Keep listening and keep speaking. Names are the best currency we have. When you say someone's name aloud, you make them more than a ghost. Write the names you've saved in your own book. Trade the knowledge you have, even if it seems small. If you don't know how to filter water or splice wire, ask. If you are hoarding out of fear, consider handing something to a neighbor and seeing what happens. Fear calcifies into isolation. Generosity keeps the net elastic. I can't promise you safety. I can't promise the black shelf won't bulge and take more than I can bear. But I can promise this. As long as a single filament glows and a single voice remembers how to call, there is a chance, not of everything returning to what it was, but of people making something livable out of what remains. That is enough for me. It has to be. Tonight I will patch the transmitter as best I can. I will oil the pedal generator and stitch another layer of plastic over the windows. I will set the schedule for the net and I will write yet another line in the ledger. Supplies checked, jars counted, watch set. I will put the whistle to my lips and blow 3 short notes, a sound that in quieter days meant return. It still means that for me. If you hear the whistle and you are able, answer. Tell me your name. Tell me how you survived the last storm. Tell me something that worked. If you are tired, blow once and I will know you are there. This is Miles on 9.7. The rain keeps learning our names. Let us teach it to call us by something kinder. Stay alive. Stay human. Keep a small flame.